Hey everyone, Monoducks here. Welcome back. Good to see you. I want to give a special shout out to Ike Walters. That could be Ika Walters. Had a question from one of my old videos about doing a duophonic patch, and the question was on the functionality of the Korg SQ1 sequencer. So it really had more to do with the programming the sequencer than the 2600. But it was such a good question, I thought it would be cool to just go back and actually do a video about it and talk a little bit about the process that I use for programming. And that means I had to recreate the patch using my own video, which is kind of one of the points of the channel for me. So I really appreciate the question and the chance to kind of go through things for you and with you. So thanks for asking. What I'm going to do, I've recreated the patch on the 2600, and we're going to take a closer look at how things are set up on the SQ1. We're going to talk a little bit about my process and a little bit about my philosophy, and see what we can do to get you closer to what you were looking for in your question. And we'll talk a little bit about my philosophy as far as recreating anything that I've done or would try to do a second time. So this is just my take on things, obviously. There are loads of SQ1 tutorials. I'll show you what I do. But it's a quirky sequencer. And if you're using it with a 2600, there are some useful ways of thinking, I think, that can help you out with that process. So hopefully this will help. So without further ado, let's dive in and take a closer look. Okay. So before I get too far into talking about how I work with the sequencer, I just want to cover some basic starting points that I usually begin from on the 2600, and this will be important because it works directly with the way the sequencer is going to affect your system, and that's how I tune the 2600. Even with this particular patch that I did in the duophonic patch, I departed from my starting point immediately. But let's start there, and then I'll talk through why I departed from that and how, just a little bit. So I'm going to ignore Oscillator 2 because that's where I started from, departing from the formula. But essentially what I do is, and let me turn down the mixer, everything's plugged into the sequencer, so I have to defeat that to show you what I'm doing. But it's all about tuning. If you want to get pitches programmed, then you need to know where you're starting. And I do recommend starting with your sequencer, your oscillators in tune. So let me just get my gates unplugged here and get all the oddball stuff out of here first. So I should be under keyboard control. Got all that stuff out. So there's an oscillator. Now what I usually do is say this is oscillator 3. What I usually do, I've got my keyboard set up to send it pitches. I usually pick an A on the keyboard, and I've got my other synthesizer set up over here, so I'm just going to switch to one of those and hit an A. And just compare the pitches and just go back and forth. Now, since I've set this up according to the patch from the previous video, I've already moved this pitch up an octave. That's going to come back into play when we're talking about this. So, but know your starting points. Now, typically, I usually start with oscillators 2 and 3 in the same octave, and then oscillator 1 an octave down. So that's kind of like a bass, and then these two are together. In this particular patch from the previous video, I used this for a bass, and the reason that I did that is because I wanted a triangle wave, and oscillator 1 doesn't have a triangle wave. So that's the only reason I departed from the formula. And if you look at the oscillators, you can see, just from the sliders, you can take a look and see that oscillator 2 has been pushed down into the lower octave. For the purpose of today's video, we're just going to listen to 2 oscillators anyway. So I'm just going to use 2 and 3 today. We've got the bass on oscillator 2 with the triangle wave, and then we'll keep the default saw wave coming out of oscillator 3, which is an octave up. Now remember those as we go through, because wherever we start with our SQ1, it's only adding voltages to what is already set on the oscillators. So that's point number 1. We are sending voltages to a starting point that is already set in the synth. That's trick number 1. Now let's get these patches back in so that the sequencer is controlling that for us. So gate A, and I've actually got my video up on the other screen. I had to look back at it. Oops, plugging into the wrong stuff. Trigger in, and then gate in. I'll talk a little bit about philosophy while I'm setting this back up. One of the many reasons I started this channel was just to have a record of the patches that I'm making. Because pictures are boring, and I could draw, but I thought it would be nice to make videos of them and to also share them. Share them with whoever's interested in the same kind of stuff. I didn't really at the beginning plan to do the jams and stuff, but I figured, while things are set up, why not have some fun? So it also became a thing of sort of overcoming my own creative inertia, which is huge for me. My inertia is enormous. It's very easy for me to just say, oh, that's going to take too much effort. So one of the things I've learned to do is try not to get hung up on control. So I like to start with an idea. Let's see if I'm getting my stuff right while I'm talking. I like to start with an idea, and I like to watch those ideas grow. And I like to have a concept of like a piece or a performance in my mind. But I like to execute that pretty quickly. And I've found that if I'm going to do a performance and a recording, might as well do a video. And then the record of it is out there. It's helping me break through some personal barriers that I've had. So that's just a little bit of personal stuff I'm sharing, but thank you for listening and watching. You are part of that process of revelation. But part of what goes along with that is the idea of collaboration. So I'll go ahead and tell you a little bit about the philosophy. We'll switch camera angles. We're going to take a closer look at the SQ1. Okay, so here we are with the SQ1. And before I go too far, I'll just take this opportunity to talk a little bit about my philosophy. So, Ike, we're going to do everything we can to get you close to what you were looking for as far as programming this thing. But I will just say, my personal philosophy is each performance is unique. So I don't personally look to replicate the things that I do too closely. what I'm trying to lock in is understanding. So I hope that's what I'm going to give you today, and show you a little bit about how I got to where I got to with this, so that you can get something that's satisfactory to you. Hope that makes sense, and I hope that is going to be something that you're looking for. A lot of what I do on this channel is really just me collaborating with the machines rather than trying to control them. So your question is really super helpful, because I'm not in a space where I'm thinking very deeply about what I'm doing as I'm putting things together. I've been working with stuff long enough that it's pretty free form for me. So to have somebody say, "Hey, how'd you do that?" is super helpful, because I don't always go back and think through that stuff. So again, thank you for asking. So let's see what we can find out about the SQ1 and the 2600 working together. So bearing in mind that we set the tuning of our oscillators already, we've got oscillator A in this case is the sequencer line A is controlling our oscillator 3 on the 2600, which, if you remember, we set an octave higher. If you look at that old patch, the patch from the previous video, and then in that same patch, I set for my bass oscillator 2. So I'm going to use sequence B to control the bass, which was an octave lower. So we're starting from that standpoint already, and we're sending control voltages to two oscillators that are already starting at pretty different standpoints. So bear that in mind. Now what I've done here is I've set up all these control knobs to be all the way down. And one other thing I'll just add, when I first got this thing, I saw all the videos with the cool bigger knobs and the lights and stuff like that, and it looked way nicer to have the bigger knobs. And I did one sort of performance where I was improvising with the pads and using them as a keyboard and doing a bunch of live stuff, and my fingers would bump the knobs and tweak the tune, and it really ruined my day. So let me advise you against doing anything but these tweaky little knobs. They seem annoying, but they stay in place. So they're pretty great. I would keep them the way they are. That's just me. Anyway, let's get to the way we program. So what I like to do, especially when I'm doing something like this, where I'm going for some pitches that I have in mind, I'm going to go straight into step jump mode. So you can go through your mode selector. Step jump mode allows you to trigger a specific step, and you can just keep triggering it so you can tune it. Let me try not to bump my camera. So you can just keep working with that one until you get it right. So first off, step jump mode is your friend when you're programming pitches. That's the first thing. Now, when we're talking about these 1 volt, 2 volt, 5 volt, 8 volt CV ranges, the way I like to think of it is you are determining how much of a range you want to be on that knob. And what that translates to, if you're thinking about it in terms of pitch. Now, remember, we're talking about voltage, but if you want to think about it like pitch, let's say I'm going to do two things at once here right now. So we've got linear, minor, major, chromatic. So chromatic is like the keys on the piano, everything, like all the black and white keys. So let's leave it there. We kind of have some familiarity with that. So chromatic, 1 volt. If I leave it there, then that means I'm going to get 1 octave of chromatic notes on this knob. And that's all I get. Now, if I switch to 2 volts, I'm going to get 2 octaves. That means two things. I get 2 octaves, but I also get smaller steps because I'm getting chromatic steps for 2 octaves in the same amount of space, right? So if I continue that and go, I want 5 volts, then I'm getting 5 octaves. And those are really tiny movements. And then, of course, you can go all the way up to 8 volts, which is ridiculous. It goes right out of the audio range, depending on where you started with your oscillator. So those are more options. And then if you go to linear, let's go back to something reasonable like 5 volts. How about 2 volts? And we've got linear, so you may have noticed there was no stepping in linear, which means this is unquantized. So the great thing about the SQ1 is that it has a built-in quantizer, which would be another complete module in your Euro rack if you were doing that. So you can quantize things to major, minor, chromatic. What's I think you can do, which I may have done in this video in question, is I think you can change settings in the midst of changing pitches. That might have happened, but I'm pretty sure that I use chromatic most of the time because I can get what I want with chromatic. And since we're all familiar with those notes, you know, chromatic contains everything. It contains pentatonic. It contains everything. Of course, major and minor do as well, with less possible mistakes depending on what you're looking for. So I think the particular piece I was doing was maybe like a minor pentatonic. So what I'm going to do, I've got YouTube on my iPad over here. I'm just going to go play that riff and see if I can start programming in notes, and we'll do this real time. Show you how I do it. Okay, so I think I've got the basic riff. So I'm nowhere close to the pitch from the video on this because this is the treble line, so I got to get there. So how am I going to find that? Well, I'm not going to get there in the 1 volt range because I'm way down here. Kind of get close towards the top, so I need to increase my range to get away from this bottom end. So I'm going to go, because I also don't want to retune my oscillator. That was a giant pain. So I'm just going to jump up to 5 volts. So that pitch is about in the middle of where the melody was that I was doing. Now, if I just look at the knob, it's kind of almost halfway up, so I'm just going to take everything and move it up there. Get me in the neighborhood of where I want to go. So now I know for sure I'm in the ballpark. I'm at the 5 volt range, which is, I'm about halfway up. I could go way lower, I could go way higher. But everything's going to be kind of close. I've got all the knobs kind of close. And if I listen to the melody of that video, I was within an octave. So I'm going to be really close, right around there. And let me see if I can get some pitches in there. Let me listen to the video. You can't hear this because it's not in the circuit. Sorry. Okay, so let's get the pitches in. So I'm here. Make sure I'm on. Oh, yeah. So I'm on linear. Let's go back to chromatic. And I skipped a step here. I'm just looking at the video. So there we go. You know what? I think think I repeated differently, so let's go. I want those notes actually to be here. Listening to the video again. Oh, okay. Sorry. So that little tail was at the end. Ta-da. Now let's just pick, these two weren't playing in the video, but let's pick some nice pitches for them. Does it make sense what I'm doing though? I'm using step jump. So those all sound pretty nice, whether I use them or not. I'm pretty sure those two are deleted out. So what I'm going to do, just before I forget, I'm switching to active step. I'm going to take those off. So if I do nothing else to this mix, actually I don't know if I want to do active step or gate on or off. Maybe I want to do that. Yeah, I think active step would skip it and make it weird timing. So let's see what this does. I'm going to turn off my bassline side. Yeah, that's what we wanted. So there's my treble line. Okay, so it still sounds pretty rough. That's fine. We're getting the pitches in. And then we're going to tweak a lot of stuff. So we've got the pitches in for the treble line. And then we're going to program the bass line. So I'm going to pull this back so we can't hear that. All right, so we can't, I've just lowered oscillator 3. And I'm going to bring up the bass side of the patch. And it's rather quiet. Maybe it'll get louder when we raise the pitch. So I think I'm going to need to go at least up to 2. Same principle as before. I think I did that note twice. I don't think I even want to program those other steps. We're just going to keep that simple. Spaced out too far. And this is the other way that you can program it, obviously. let's hear both sides of it now. That sounds pretty close to what we had. Cool. All right. So I've used step jump to program my pitches. With the pitch settings, I used the 5-volt range to get to where I wanted. I used chromatic on both sides, so it was 5-volt range to get to where I wanted for the upper. My 2600 oscillator was set. If you saw like the beginning of the video, it's kind of halfway between the 100 hertz and the 1 kilohertz range. The bass is right around the 100 hertz range. And then I'm using the 2-volt per octave range for that. Speed is, it's at 3 o'clock. Duty cycle I've left pretty far open. Let's see. I'll make it a little bit pluckier. Okay, so now I'm going back to just to make it sound like more like it did in the video. I've just raised my ADSR control over the filter, raising up my reverb. And as I often do, I'm just reaching over to my Electron Digatone to throw in some delay. Raise the volume on this whole thing for you. Gets us pretty close. There we go, a little bit of resonance. So that's kind of the very bare bone basics of my approach to programming the SQ1. So I hope that's been helpful. Appreciate you hanging out for a little bit longer with us on the SQ1. It's a great tool. I really love it. And it's tempting to get a second one, maybe a couple more. But money constraints being what they are. Anyway, I hope this has been useful, and Ike, I appreciate your question. I hope that you also see that your question is probably helping other people out. So, which brings me to another thing I'd like to say. If you're interested in supporting this channel, one way that's really important to me right now, for getting your support, is to get your questions. That's really the most important thing you could do. I would love to work on your questions, either about the 2600 or about just general synth concepts or just anything like that, or if you've seen anything in my workflows that you're wondering about. I would love to break stuff down for you. So I think that's a lot of fun. I really enjoy doing it. So please, if you want to support the channel, ask me some questions. That's really where it's at for me. That's really what I'd like to do. So don't be shy. If you have a question, somebody else probably does too. And there are no dumb questions. Somebody out there on the internet just picked up their first synth today, and they probably need to know something that's pretty basic. So maybe we can help them out. It'd be great to help somebody get into this stuff. The eagle-eyed among you may have noticed that I've got a new toy up here. So future video coming on that, which is actually directly relevant to the limitations that were discussed about this patch in my earlier video. So everything's kind of coming together beautifully. Thank you, Ike. So we'll talk about that next time. A new module, and talk about how to maybe start expanding your 2600 system one piece at a time for those of us who are supporting themselves very slowly through the modular journey, as I am. That stuff's expensive, so you gotta kind of think of how to get bang for your buck as you go. So I'll share my thoughts on that with you next time. So hope to see you again. In the meantime, happy patching. Great to have you with us, and thanks for watching.